Hi, you got it right. 3 mothers-in-law, 3 stories. All story timings are in the description. Don't forget to subscribe, and of course enjoy watching. First story, Hungry Wolf. Yuri worked on a rotational basis, often being away from home for 2 or 3 months at a time. It was almost impossible to earn decent money in his provincial town, which is why he chose such an exhausting way of life. It was not easy both physically and mentally, because not all the colleagues with whom he was coincidentally locked in the same rooms for months were sympathetic to him. Most of all, of course, it was hard for an active and sexually mature man without a woman's affection. When he came home, he literally pounced on his beloved Katya and did not let her out of the bedroom all day. This time was the happiest and most pleasant in his life because he felt like a real man. You can see for yourself, an excellent provider who after the receipt could afford to take his wife to any, even the most expensive restaurant in their city and spoil her with other expensive gifts. On top of that, a wonderful lover whom his wife waited for from the watch as much as he waited for her. The family lived in such a rhythm of life for 5 years, for which many moments have become painfully familiar. For example, Yuri got used to the fact that at home, at the specified time, he would be met by his wife without clothes in negligee, and on the kitchen table would be smoking freshly cooked pilaf, which was his favorite dish. That day, for the first time, everything went wrong. In the family of a close friend of Katya, there was a misfortune, and she could not pass by. Rushing to her right from the morning, the girl risked staying at her friend's house for the night. She was torn between her and the long-awaited arrival of her husband, however, made a priority on her friend's problem. Remembering her husband's predilections, Katya asked her mother to come to her house and cook Yura's favorite dish from the prepared products. Her mother-in-law was not delighted with this request, but nevertheless agreed to help her daughter. She was generally a rather weak-willed and driven woman, so any requests of relatives and friends were above her interests. She was a little afraid of her son-in-law, considering him a rather callous and overbearing man. But there was nothing to do. Tatyana Konstantinovna excused herself from work and came home to her daughter. In order not to dirty her office clothes, she found some of Katina's robe and put it on right over her underwear. The size of her daughter's clothes was a little smaller than the woman's, so it was tight on her. Tatyana Konstantinovna's large breasts were ready to fall out of the top, so the woman tied the belt as tightly as possible. Since her daughter liked short robes, the woman's legs were bare above the knee. She knew how to cook and liked it very much, so there was no problem with the pilaf. However, the closer the time of her son-in-law's arrival approached, the more nervous the woman became. In addition to the circumstances, Yuri's phone was unavailable. The old battery once again failed, so the surprise for him promised to be quite unexpected. 2 minutes before the specified time, the pedantic and punctual man was already approaching the familiar door to his own apartment. The 3-month business trip was over, and in his large sports bag, in addition to a pile of dirty things, was a huge amount of cash and some gifts for his favorite wife. Yuri had been dreaming about her for a long time, and in the last few days, his groin had been making itself known every hour. Thoughts of Katya's beautiful body just drove him crazy, and he literally counted hours and even minutes until he met her. Calling the apartment, he pulled a carnivorous smile on his face and prepared a dirty phrase for his wife. But when the door opened, the man froze on the threshold. The smile slowly slid off his face, and he froze in indecision. Yuri had a break in the pattern. On the one hand, everything was familiar. The location of the apartment, its address, even the smells from inside were the same as he was used to. Freshly cooked pilaf smelled so strong that the man began to salivate profusely in an instant. Even the robe on the woman who met him was familiar, except that she had aged 20 years and visibly increased in volume. "Hello, Yura," Tatyana Konstantinovna said confusedly. Her son-in-law's reaction had already managed to embarrass her. "Hello?" From surprise, the man even forgot what his own mother-in-law's name was. "Come in." The woman invited the guest into his own apartment. "Did something happen to Katya?" Directly he asked, taking a step inside and cautiously looking around. It was as if Yuri had been expecting some other trick. Something happened at her friend's place, and she had to leave for her place as a matter of urgency. Wisely, Tatyana Konstantinovna began to justify herself. I see. Are you sure it was to a friend and not to a friend? Thoughts of his wife's infidelity crept into the man's head. With a prolonged absence from home, they were very intrusive, and Yuri feared his wife's infidelity more than anything else in the world. No, of course not. Of course to a friend's house. Come in, sit down to eat. I've just made pilaf. Thank you so much for the pilaf, it smells really good. The man softened a little. Mother-in-law smiled back and went to the kitchen, preparing to put a large portion in the man's favorite plate. But Yuri still walked around the apartment for a while, as if checking if everything was still in place during his absence. If Katya had met him, he would have dragged her straight to the bedroom without too many questions, having barely washed his hands. But the presence of his mother-in-law at home made him remember about other hygiene. The man was well aware of how he might smell after a long trip, and no less long time in a confined space with other men. Without saying a word to Tatyana Konstantinovna, he shaved, and then left the bathroom with only a wide towel tied around his bare thighs. If it hadn't been for his mother-in-law, he would have been naked, but because of Tatyana Konstantinovna, he was forced to depart a little from his own habits. He couldn't go any further than that. As soon as the man sat down at the table, a large plate with a huge mountain of pilaf immediately materialized in front of him. Large pieces of mutton decorated the dish, and Yuri, without further ado, pounced on it. Tatyana Konstantinovna looked at her son-in-law with bewilderment and fear. He seemed to her like a wild, hungry animal. Yuri, were you not fed there at all, or what? She asked daringly. Swallowing the food in large portions and burning his tongue, the man said, We were fed, but it wasn't food. It was what you made. It was unbelievable. It was the highest compliment for a woman. The pilaf quickly disappeared, and with it came Yuri. Having eaten the whole portion, he pushed the empty plate away from him and looked at his mother-in-law with gratitude. Very tasty, much tastier than Katya's. So the student could not surpass his teacher, Tatyana Konstantinovna joked. But the woman immediately felt the insolent and unapologetic look of her son-in-law. If Yuri was able to satiate his stomach, another animal feeling still bothered him a lot. During the business trip, he had seen women only at the airport and on board the airplane, where at the inspection of their seductive bodies, his libido in an instant woke up and demanded lovemaking. Now in front of his lustful eyes sat a pretty mature woman, whose bust was pulled down by a narrow robe and as if deliberately provoked the man. Yuri could no longer tear his gaze away from it, literally staring at her. Tatyana Konstantinovna embarrassedly looked away, realizing perfectly well what was the reason for such close attention of her son-in-law. His body woke up and began to rise under the dense fabric of the robe. The man was saved by the fact that he was still sitting at the table, and his mother-in-law did not see his body's reaction to her body. However, Yuri's mind was already clouded, and he could think of only one thing. Seeing only a love object in his mother-in-law's face, the man made a last attempt to shift his attention to something else. He got up from the table, deciding to put the plate in the sink, after which he would go to his room to unpack, but he wasn't used to tying knots on a towel, and never knew how, so his only cover fell at his feet as soon as he got up from the table. Tatyana Konstantinovna stared at his friend with rounded eyes, who only hardened even more from such a reaction. You, Yura, what are you doing? The woman only managed to squeeze out of herself. Her frightened voice finally pushed the man to decisive actions, and as if apologizing, but quite confidently, he said, Nothing personal, Tatyana Konstantinovna. You yourself provoke me. The man's hands went to the waistband of her robe and began to hastily untie it. Overflowing with passion, he still managed it. When the extra clothes fell at the feet of the compliant woman, she obediently let him take off everything else. Tatyana Konstantinovna did not dare to interfere, not only that she was frightened, but also in addition, she got turned on when she saw the size. The woman had not had intimacy for a long time, and on the kitchen table, and even more so. Yuri laid her on her back and took her as if she were his young wife, but, as it turned out, Tatyana Konstantinovna was not inferior to her. Having become hot, she quickly got involved in the process, giving her son-in-law the long-awaited pleasure. Soon the couple moved to the bedroom and continued their spontaneous intimacy there. It took about an hour before the man got up and, taking the charged cell phone in his hands, dialed his wife's number. "Hi, how are you?" "Yeah, I'm home. No, don't hurry. Stay until morning. I'll find something to do." With these words, Yuri glanced at his mother-in-law, who was already smiling unashamedly at him, waiting for the continuation. How's that for a story format? Write your opinion in the comments. Now on to the second story. Second story, additional swimming lessons. Vladimir worked in an ordinary municipal swimming pool, which could be visited by absolutely every resident of the city, from school children to pensioners. The time of the sessions was distributed in such a way as to separate the flows of people, and so that the privileged groups did not overlap with those who paid to visit the pool from their own pockets. The man had to work with everyone. Only with some of them he was directly engaged as a coach, and during the swims of others, he just observed in the role of a lifeguard. He liked that kind of work. Of course, it paid low, but everything was compensated by communication with different interesting people, new connections, including with young beautiful girls. With his wife, Vladimir also met in this pool, when he noticed her beautiful ass periodically showing above the waterline. The man made remarks to her more often than other visitors, and once, under the threat of not letting the girl into the pool without a cap, found out her phone number. Of course, it was difficult for her to refuse a tall, athletic, and brazen man, so she quickly succumbed to his charms and in a few months jumped out to marry Vladimir. Soon, without ceasing to love him, she was a little disappointed in her hasty decision. She was jealous of the man to every girl she met, because they hung on him at every corner. This is not surprising. Vladimir was not only a handsome guy, but also had a gift of eloquence. He was clever and resourceful, in general possessing those qualities for which almost all the girls of the world were after. Vladimir's wife's jealousy was not groundless. Family status and a stamp in the passport absolutely did not embarrass the man, and did not stop him from flirting and getting to know other girls. Vladimir got close to girls in any place available to him, but most often it happened in a small but personal locker room coach. He called his small room office. Apparently, the presence of a desk, a closet, and a narrow sofa allowed him to christen it in this way. But the female visitors of this office did not care what it was called. They were more interested in the man himself, his body, and in particular what he had between his legs. These dimensions were commensurate with his tall stature, so no girl left him disappointed or unsatisfied. But the main advantage of this room was that only the staff of the sports complex had access to it. Ordinary visitors could not get into this area, and therefore, the probability that Vladimir's wife caught him cheating tended to 0. However, she herself had undergone initiation in the same room, so every day, sending her husband to work, nervously imagined him with others. In relations with the opposite sex, the man was picky, but hunted not only for young and slender. An interesting twist in the appearance of mature women could also attract his attention. Moreover, in some ways, they attracted him even more than women of the same age. In his opinion, women from 35 and older were not so capricious and did not demand the impossible from him. They knew perfectly well what they wanted from a man and were ready to get close to him without any gifts and empty promises, unlike their younger rivals. One of these women, in whose movements and appearance Vladimir noticed this very chip, was his own mother-in-law. But he learned about it quite by accident. "Hello, beautiful. How can I help you?" He turned to the visitor standing with her back to him. He paid attention to her seductive forms from the opposite end of the pool, so he purposefully went to her, not paying attention to the other people around him. "Hello, Volodya. Oh, Natalia Anatolievna. Good afternoon. What brings you here?" "Well, first of all, thanks for the compliment. And secondly, didn't my daughter tell you? I sprained my ankle ligament, so they prescribed therapy. Aqua aerobics and stuff. You know what's going on here." "Okay, you know what? Take care of yourself. Of course, I don't lead group classes, but I can help with advice or something else." "Thank you, Volodya. I'll go, or rather, I'll waddle." The woman really slowly walked towards the elderly women who were getting ready for the beginning of the class. Natalia Anatolievna looked like a foreign body next to them. Relative to the others, she looked simply gorgeous. Large, but not sagging breasts contrasted beautifully against the background of a narrow waist, smoothly passing into firm buttocks. At the same time, Vladimir's mother-in-law was not shy to show all her charms to the other visitors of the pool. Unlike the other women, who wore closed swimsuits, Natalia Anatolievna, as if on purpose, dressed in relatively small rags, which for some reason called a swimsuit. Such a look would have been appropriate on the beach, but not in a municipal swimming pool. Standing aside, Vladimir began to perform his immediate duties, but all his attention was focused on the appetizing body of his own mother-in-law. She lowered herself to a shallow depth, immersed in the water only up to her waist. Obediently repeating the movements of another trainer, she actively waved her arms and moved her legs underwater, from which her breasts were walking from side to side, seducing all the men around her. One of them met Vladimir's eyes and showed him his right thumb. It seemed that Natalia Anatolievna's appearance was appreciated by everyone present. Half an hour passed and the class came to an end. The woman, as the most diligent student, was the last to leave the pool. Not without difficulty, having climbed up the ladder, she did not have time to reach her flip-flops, and having unsuccessfully put her sick foot, slipped and fell down again. A loud cry of pain rang out around the pool, and about 10 men immediately came to her side, wanting to help her and perhaps get acquainted. Natalia Anatolievna was immediately grabbed by her arms, trying to lift her up, causing her to moan again. A ruckus arose, stopping the movement in the entire pool. Suddenly, it was stopped by a sharp whistle. Everyone turned at the sound and saw Vladimir standing behind the other men. By his confident posture and coach's uniform, everyone realized that the show was over and they could leave, but the most persistent men were still trying to help the woman. "Stand back," he said briefly. "Why is that?" asked the most insolent of the surrounding men, who held Natalia Anatolievna under his arm. "Because it is my duty to help visitors and victims in the pool. Why do not you cope with it and allowed that the woman was injured?" The man wouldn't stop. "I can't keep track of everyone, especially from the opposite end of the pool. For example, I can't guarantee that you won't fall and bang your temple on the edge of the tiles here today." The hint was more than clear to most of the men, and even the most talkative retreated. Only one remained, who just stood there and looked at Vladimir defiantly. "She is my mother-in-law. Let me accompany her and provide medical care." More softly he said. Having driven away the last admirer of Natalia Anatolievna, the son-in-law put his shoulder to her and slowly led her to his room. "Thank you, Volodya, because those kites almost pecked me." "You're welcome, Natalia Anatolievna. How did you manage to do that?" "I don't know. Here it is, your famous office," the woman said, coming inside and immediately sitting down on the sofa. "What do you mean?" Vladimir was about to pull out the medicine cabinet, but his hands froze in the air. "Well, do not pretend. I know very well from my daughter that you seduced her here. There's a rumor going around the girls' locker room that you're bringing women here. Even a couple of my friends said that you've been taking young and pretty girls in this direction." "That's news," the man said, having learned the unexpected information. "So that's my reputation. I thought you were satisfied with it. Is it wrong?" The woman spoke too brazenly, as if trying to get something from her son-in-law. "Put your foot on the armrest." He tried to change the subject. The man took some ointment out of the medicine cabinet and began to rub it gently into the woman's swollen ankle. "You're not talking? Then I'm in the right place." The woman smiled. "What do you want?" asked Vladimir. "I'm very interested to know if the rumors about you and what's in there are true." Natalia Anatolievna pointed her finger at the man's groin. This came as an even bigger surprise to Vladimir. It turns out that his and his mother-in-law's attention to each other turned out to be mutual. Always insolent and self-confident man was confused and mechanically took a bandage to fix the stretched area of the woman's leg. At this moment, his mother-in-law went even further. She put her hands behind her back, and in a couple of seconds, she threw off her outer clothing. Vladimir froze, enjoying the view. From what he saw and everything that was happening, he involuntarily opened his mouth. "I expected from you to be more spontaneous," the woman said unhappily. In front of Vladimir, in his office, in his refuge, on the sofa, his own mother-in-law succumbed to temptation. Without thinking of the consequences, he finally lost his head. Pulling off his athletic pants, as was his custom, he took all the initiative, proving to the woman that she was not wrong in her guesses. When their much-hyped intimacy was complete, the man sat down next to his mother-in-law on the couch and placed her leg in his lap. "We need to make a bandage," he said mundanely, as if nothing unusual had just happened between them. "And what will happen next?" The woman asked a vague question. "Come to the scheduled classes, and after them, I'll do the bandaging." He winked. And finally, the final third story. Third story, good incense. Tanya and I met online on one particular dating site. Not to hide, it had a straight-up smutty orientation. As a result, after a long search for a soulmate, we found one in each other. We were young, and we constantly wanted to experiment, both in general, in life, and in bed. Not to hide, our hobbies are out of the accepted norms of morality in society, so we never advertised them. But at the same time, if we were asked, we would easily recognize ourselves as perverts. Although this is also quite a stretch. For some people, love not under the blanket and not in the missionary position is already considered perversion. From the first day of our acquaintance, we listened to each other very sensitively and attentively, trying to realize any adequate fantasies in bed and even outside it. In the end, we always succeeded, so our young family not only looked happy, but was so. Everyone around us, friends, acquaintances, and relatives, were amazed at our constant positivity and joyful faces. They would ask, "What's your secret?" and we would only smile embarrassedly and shrug our shoulders. But then, when we returned home, we did not hide our thoughts and emotions, giving ourselves entirely to each other. Love intimacy did not bore us, because for a month we had time to do and try so many unusual things that other people could not realize all their lives. One day, I had another wild but obsessive thought in my head. "Tanya, we need to talk." I started from afar. "Oh, I love it when you say that. It means that something very interesting and unforgettable is waiting for us." My wife immediately took her eyes off the TV and stared at me with a twinkle in her eyes. "Well, this time it's not us, but me, and it's not a fact that it's waiting. Look, why are you so shy? You and I have never kept anything from each other. Tell it like it is, and I'll understand you. Who else but me?" Tanya was smiling and encouraging me. "All right. It's just that it's quite unusual even for you and me. Come on!" My wife jumped on the couch like a little girl. "I want to make love to your mom." "Oh, wow!" Tanya immediately froze in place, trying to digest what she'd heard. "If you say no, I'll just forget about my idea and never say it out loud again. I see I've shocked you." "No, I'm not. It was just really unexpected." "Ha! Ha!" Tanya laughed, which meant that my obsession still had some chance of success. "Well, there you go." I was confused. It's not that I'm constantly thinking about it and would like only that, but still this fantasy will not get out of my head. "Well, if you want to know my opinion, I don't mind, of course. And my mom's pretty cute, so I totally get it. We promised each other to allow any experiments, but there is another point. If everything happens, will it not spoil the relationship between us and my mom? That's what worries me the most," I confessed. "Oh, you my dog. So you don't doubt that you can put your mother-in-law in bed?" Continuing to smile, asked my beloved. "Of course I doubt it, but—" "Stop. I won't participate in the process. It's your fantasy, not mine. I am absolutely not attracted to my mom sexually." The girl's having second thoughts. "But I'll help you set up a situation in which you can show all your skills as a lover." "Thank you, Tanya. You're golden. But how do we set it up?" "I don't know yet, but I think she should realize that I won't know about your intimacy." "I agree. But still, how do we organize it? Apart from getting her drunk, I haven't thought of anything good yet." "Oh, you have. Remember that salon we went to a year ago that smelled like incense?" "Yeah, you can't forget that. I had a headache for 3 days." "You had a headache. I had a dizzy headache. At that moment, I thought I was going to kill myself if you didn't touch me." "Wow." "Yes. So this incense only works on women. All we have to do is get them." Surprisingly, Tanya was more excited than me about seducing her own mother. It turned out to be very difficult to find out the correct name of the dried stuff that so excited women's receptors. It was even harder to buy it. It took us several weeks of searching and a complicated procedure to buy this herb. Thank goodness it wasn't a drug, and the stupefying effects of it were harmless to our health. Before practicing with my mother-in-law, Tanya and I tested the stuff on her. I left my wife for only 5 minutes behind closed doors with her, and when I went inside the room, it was as if I was attacked by a pack of Amazons. I thought the girl would tear me to pieces. She was so agitated that it was as if she had gone mad. "What was that?" I asked after hours of marathon, struggling to get out of bed to air the room. "I don't know. It was like I was possessed." "Thanks. I noticed." I said, "Okay, I need a break for 2 or 3 days." That time, Tanya squeezed all the juices out of me, but after a few days she called her mom and invited her to visit. Her mother-in-law liked socializing with us, so she agreed without hesitation. She herself was relatively young in body and soul, so she liked to spend time with young people. When Anna Sergeyevna came to our house, I looked at her from head to toe, not without pleasure and sporting interest. For more than a month, I had been dreaming of her, and now my mother-in-law had finally come to us herself. The obsessive thought of intimacy with her immediately made me imagine a mature woman without that stupid dress. Not sensing a catch, my mother-in-law brought us small presents and cookies of her own making. We drank tea in the kitchen and talked about all sorts of nonsense for about an hour. Finally, Tanya went out somewhere, and when she came back, she said, "Mom, Dim, please forgive me. I was urgently called to work. I have to run away, and unfortunately, I won't be back soon, in about 5 hours." She glanced at me, and I noticed that the corners of her lips barely trembled. She could hardly contain a smile. "Mom, I wanted to show you a video on TV. Come on, it won't take long. Don't be frightened. The humidifier is working there. The smell is specific." She took my mother-in-law into our bedroom and came back a couple minutes later. "I've only been in there a couple minutes and I'm ready to jump on you again. What is this nuclear thing? All right, get a hold of yourself and get out of the house. Just make sure you don't jump on the first guy you see." "I can't promise you anything." My favorite winked at me. After waiting a few more minutes to be sure, I looked at myself in the mirror and quickly stepped into the bedroom. After shutting the door behind me so that the incense wouldn't escape, I turned toward my mother-in-law. At first, I didn't recognize her at all. No, it was her, of course, but her gaze was maddening. She stared at me with unblinking eyes, bit her lip, and began to rub her dress. "What's the matter with you?" "Just in case," I asked again. "I don't know. Something hot here at you," she answered in a hoarse voice. "I'm going to wash up." "Wait." I had to keep her in the room so as not to lose the effect. "Give me your hand. I'll feel your pulse." I did take my mother-in-law's palm and wrist with both hands, which was the first and last straw for her. She felt the approach of a man, and I immediately felt the heat of her body and deep but frequent breathing. "Dima, I'm sorry. I don't know what's wrong with me, but I..." The woman did not finish the phrase, kissed me. She wrapped her arms around me so tightly, as if she was afraid to lose me. She didn't seem to realize what she was doing, turning wild and maniacal in an instant. She pushed me onto the bed, and I fell obediently onto the covers. Of course, I didn't resist, enjoying the show. Besides, I was seriously turned on, watching the animal lust of the one I had dreamed of for so long. I didn't even have to do anything. The woman did everything for me, as she was already experienced in this business. Her gorgeous bust was right in front of my face, which excited me more than any incense. Further, my mother-in-law, more like a tigress, did things to me that day that I would repeat more than once. "What's wrong with me?" she said when I had ventilated the room and we had both come to our senses. "I don't know, but I really want to do it again," I said honestly. "Well, I don't even know. I'm so embarrassed. When is Tanya's next day at work?" So that's the end of all the hot stories. Once again, I want to know what you think about this new format of stories, so I look forward to your responses in the comments.